Thank you for listening to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast, available on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Stitcher. Also, please follow Matt's Movie Reviews on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Reddit, Instagram, and MeWe. And of course, be sure to visit mattsmoviereviews.net for the latest reviews, top 10 lists, and more. Now, on to the show.
Hello, I'm Johnny Cash.
Johnny told me I'm my happiest when I'm performing. But sometimes Cash gets into trouble.
You know, he's the kind of guy, walked into a room, everybody turned around.
Because Johnny Cash was Johnny Cash.
There was not one person that didn't respect Johnny Cash.
He sort of lived in his own atmosphere.
His unapologetic attitude, that's what made Johnny Cash cool.
He was my hero for all the right reasons and all the wrong reasons.
He surely had to think back and say, was it all worth it?
We were all young and wild and crazy.
How crazy were you?
All as crazy as you can get. Success, all the partying, all the money, all the fame, all that. Something is not going to last.
And you begin to realize there's got to be something more.
Past that is a guy who's broken and knows he needs God.
It's hard to put a finger on and say, this is the person that he was, because there was so much to him.
He was darkness and light, living in the same body, and one fought against the other.
He wanted to be the biggest thing in the world, and he became the biggest thing in the world. And then he stepped back, and he said, that's not all there is.
There's no lonelier place on earth for a man to be than separated from God.
He faced himself, he faced his temptations, he faced his worldliness, and came out wanting to be right with God.
It's a biblical precedent that God uses complicated people.
It's all fleeting. As fame is fleeting, so are all the trappings of fame.
Do you have any regrets about what you've done?
I forgave myself. When God forgave me, I figured I better do it too.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 484. Releasing on December 5 in select theaters across the US is Johnny Cash, The Redemption of an American Icon, a documentary that explores the religious life of the country music legend, who from the depths of a drug and alcohol-fueled darkness found a guiding light in the teachings of Christianity. Featuring never-before-heard interviews from the man in black himself, along with testimonials from the likes of Sheryl Crow, Tim McGraw, Alice Cooper, along with members of Johnny's family. Johnny Cash, The Redemption of an American Icon is a moving and intimate testament to the character and faith of a global superstar and icon. And for more information, you can go to fathomevents.com. You can find screening times near a cinema near you if you're in the US. And I do recommend everyone do watch this in the cinema because the photography and the sound and a lot of other things is terrific in the movie. And joining me now is the director of Johnny Cash, The Redemption of an American Icon, Mr. Ben Smallbone. Ben, how are you today?
Good, Matt. Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely. I mean, as soon as I found out about this documentary, I knew it was something I need to watch. I myself am a Christian. I myself am a Johnny Cash fan. I liked the Walk the Line movie. I thought it was a pretty good biopic. Joaquin Phoenix was terrific in it. But what your documentary does, I think, is correct a great wrong that movie did, which was that film neglected Johnny Cash's faith, it neglected his spiritual life. And I'm sure there's reasons for that. If you're going to sell to a secular audience, maybe talking about his Christianity wasn't the way to go, but it undercuts the man's value and a man's kind of like a lot of the purpose of what he did. In some ways, you doing this documentary, do you feel like that maybe you're correcting a great wrong that film did? I'm sure there's many reasons you did do this documentary, but was that a portion of it?
Yeah, great question. We sat just a month ago and presented the film John Carter Cash, his only son, and he watched the film and afterwards turned to me and the team and said, "Hey, this is the documentary that my dad would be most proud of." And you look at the man's journey the last few decades of his life, and everything he did had a spin of faith in it. Whether it's his American recordings, whether it's his movie The Gospel Road, whether it's the books he wrote, every chance he could, he talked about his faith and what God did in his life. And so, yeah, I walked the line. I love the film, but there was definitely, for the sake of Hollywoodizing the story, there was elements that they had to drop. Beyond just his faith, there was elements that they had to drop. I think, the story about his marriage, I feel like they made her look like a vengeful, bitter, nasty lady, and the story that we tell is and have discovered is anything but that. But yes, obviously they left out key parts of his faith as well, and hopefully with this doc we remedy a lot of that and set the story straight as much as we can.
Redemption is such an important word, especially in Johnny Cash's story, and to me it feels like such a lost word these days. It seems like people are so quick to judge and take so long to forgive. There's many reasons for that. I think the more secularized our society has become, the teachings of Christ and the teachings of Christianity has kind of gone on the wayside, and it's been replaced by something else. I don't know what it is exactly. It kind of makes me think, though, if Johnny Cash was around these days and he went through the things that he went through, do you think there would have been ample opportunity for him to have that redemption? Because it is hard to tell, I know, but with today's media landscape and social media and such, I kind of think about that sometimes. What would Johnny Cash be like today? Have you ever thought of that yourself in regards to, if Johnny Cash was around today and he got busted, trying to take drugs into Mexico, exactly what would happen to him after that? And even his conversion to Christianity, even back in the 70s and 60s, some people didn't like it. These days, anyone who kind of proclaims their faith in that sort of positive, healthy, in profound way, I think there'll be more sideways glances now than it was back then.
Yeah, good question. If Johnny Cash was alive today, I think it depends which Johnny. If you look at TMZ and the magazines, the gossip magazines, and then add the social media aspect of what we have today, Johnny Cash, prior to entering into the cave and turning his life around, he would have been destroyed. You wouldn't have found anything positive or good about his life, sadly. Just the way that society is today, where we want to celebrate everybody falling down. I think it's way more dramatic and sad than it was, 40 years ago when he was having some of his later struggles. Johnny Cash, in his later years, I think would have used every platform he could have to spread the story of redemption. I think he would have celebrated his redemption story, other people's redemption. I think he would have been forgiving. What I've witnessed based off what I've read and researched and the tapes that I've listened to, the man, he was an incredible man after God's own heart. And he was really using everything he could in the time that he had left on the earth to talk about what God had done in his life. And sadly, at the end of his life, the stage probably wasn't big enough for the message that he had to tell. And so I think this doc is a big part of hopefully continuing those last statements that he wanted to make and tell the world.
Before the film dives into the redemption, before it dives into Johnny Cash's rebirth as a Christian man, it does also dive into, the depths of his addictions, of his substance abuse. And a lot of it comes from life on the road. And Marty Stewart, who does such fantastic narration in the film. I mean, I want to talk about that soon, but his voice is just rich timber. I mean, it's just a beautiful voice for narration.
Absolutely.
But he has a line in the movie where he says, the white line always wins when it comes to, life on the road. And when it comes to Johnny, the pills, the alcohol, the depression, the breakdown of his marriage, all these things kind of culminated to kind of like the destruction of not only his physical being, but his spiritual being as well. How important was it to really show just how bad it really got for Johnny Cash? Because I'm sure like people remember the movie and heard stories, but I don't think people really can understand just how young he was, just how quickly he became famous, and just how quickly things kind of spiraled for him.
Yeah. So, light shines brightest in the dark. And so we felt like in telling the story, we kind of had to take the audience on a journey into the darkness. And, the title of the film is Redemption of an American Icon. Well, if you don't know what you're being redeemed from, redemption isn't really as strong. So I think, going into the depths of his struggles was important to us and important to his son. John Carter Cash gave us this incredible interview where he walked us through some of his darkest, most inner struggles, and so did his sister Joanne. And I think that they were willing to go there, knowing what comes on the other side and his redemption story. And what I hoped with the, dipping into some of the darker struggles of his life was that we didn't glamorize it, but we showed that it was, obviously it affected him incredibly physically. It damaged his relationships, and not just his family relationships, but a lot of his business relationships too. And so I think the other thing that we really wanted to emphasize was how slippery the slope was. This wasn't something that he just woke up one day and goes, "Hey, I'm gonna become an alcoholic and a drug addict, and I'm gonna walk away from my family." It was a slow, steady, gradual falling for him, to the point where doctors were initially prescribing him these drugs that he was taking. And it was a very commonplace thing for truck drivers and doctors and college students to take these drugs to get up in the morning, and then they would take more drugs to go to sleep at night. And when you combine that with this newfound fame that he had, this newfound fortune that he had, the responsibilities at home while he's being out on the road 200 days a year, I think it's a message to the audience of like, hey guys, we think we're better than that, but you put any one of us in one of those situations, and I don't know if we are. And so our hope was to make it as relatable as possible, the darkness that he slowly fell into in his 20s and 30s.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you'll love. The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon. The world's leading online store, Amazon is your first stop to buy a wide range of products at competitive prices with fast delivery times. Amazon is also a world-class entertainment hub that includes Prime Video, Audible, Twitch, Amazon Music, and more. Sign up with Amazon today and experience the best in online shopping and entertainment. Please support Matt's Movie Reviews on Patreon. Get access to exclusive content, request movie reviews and top 10 lists, and help support my work. Please click on the Patreon link in the description below. There's a moment in the film, or part in the film, which I think is just remarkable. It's a story about how Johnny's on his land. He finds himself in a cave. He finds himself deep in the depths of the cave, and he's there to just give up and give in. He's had enough, and he's ready to die. Then at that moment, he hears a voice, and the voice tells him that it is my will that you will not die now, which is such a, when he tells that story, and you got this great audio throughout the film, you got great footage, great audio, and hearing Johnny himself tell the stories throughout his life is just so incredible. As soon as he says that and he sees the light shining and he decides to crawl and to make his way back, I mean, it's just such an incredible story, and the way that he tells it as well, and the way it's depicted in the film is fantastic as well. Did you know anything about that beforehand? Is this the first time you came across that story? Because, I am a Johnny Cash fan. I'm not deep into the dregs of Cashdom, but I know a little bit. I never came across that before. I mean, it's just such a remarkable part of his life that I don't think I've heard before.
No, I had not heard that until I started on this journey. I actually started filming this October 2018. We started this, the project stopped and started many times over the 4 years, but that's when we first started our interviews with Joanne, his sister, down in Dyess, Arkansas. But when I heard that story, I was like, guys, that's a story you build a movie around.
Yeah.
If we're talking about redemption, I don't know if there's a better metaphor of redemption than a man going to the depths of a cave to die. And then going into the darkness finds a light, and then that light brings him out to his, newfound faith and ultimately redeems him. So no, I was not familiar with that story until we started on the project. And again, when we discovered it, everybody on the team, producer, me, we're like, hey, that's something you build the whole film around. That's a beginning, middle, and end. And we had to tell it because I don't know if there's a better metaphor. If there was a parable that Jesus was going to tell about a cave and somebody wandering into a cave and it being Johnny Cash, that would be a parable that I think is, Jesus worthy in terms of redemption and showing that visually. I couldn't imagine a better way. It was almost like Johnny, lived that story so we could make this documentary.
I mean, it is such an incredible story too, and it is, I think, central not only thematically, but also visually to what you're presenting in the film, because it just lends itself to be so. I think as a filmmaker yourself, when you heard that, not only would you be moved by it, but as a storyteller and a filmmaker, you're thinking to yourself, yes, this is going to look so good on the screen. It does, it really does. So he goes into the light. He finds himself reborn, remarried, a new lease of life, a new lease on his artistry and his music. And he we talked before about what platform he'll use today, but the platform he used back then, he had his own show and he had the Folsom prison record. And through all of these things, he really made proclamations of his faith, but he had pushback in regards to that. There's a quote that he has in the film where he says, being a Christian means giving up on the world. And it not necessarily means giving up on the world regarding, not having faith in the world and not having hope in the world, but it pretty much means, the things that a lot of people take for granted, the things that, aren't are available for everyone else, isn't necessarily available for people with a Christian worldview, because once you present that Christian worldview, you are shunned in a lot of ways. Unfortunately, these days, that seems more than ever. When you're out there in the States yourself and you're a part of a filmmaking community, and its entertainment industry in a lot of ways doesn't lend itself openly to Christian voices. Have you found that yourself, you and your brothers, that you guys proclaiming your own Christianity and being very successful in doing so, do you find pushback in certain circles in regards to being a Christian in the entertainment industry, kind of similar ways that Johnny Cash did?
Yeah, great question. We live in Nashville, Tennessee, and in some ways are protected from a lot of that. Every now and then on a project, you will see something flare up. Oh, he's a Christian filmmaker, so he might not be right for the project. Oh, they're a Christian band, so maybe they won't be right for the project. I think Christian artists so oftentimes have that Christian title added to them, but can I be a filmmaker that's a Christian? Why does Christian have to come before that in terms of the way that my abilities are marketed to the world, or the way my brother's abilities are marketed to the world? That's a constant conversation of like, I am a Christian and my Christian faith is going to be prevalent in the stories that I tell in certain ways. And my brothers are the same way. But is their music, every other lyric, Jesus? No, because they have an opportunity to outreach beyond just the church, outside of the faith-based box. And my hope, even with this film, is the same. I look at the story and I go, I think there's so many things that are relatable to people in the church and outside of the church. And I think the opportunity for people to bring a friend that may never step foot in the halls of a church to go see this in a movie theater, which is a safe place, and be moved by this American icon story, and maybe even start asking some of the questions that he asked. That's what really excites me about this film. And I hope even in the marketing of it that necessarily people go, oh, that's a faith-based Johnny Cash story. I think it's a Johnny Cash story that has a little bit of faith-based elements in it. But at the end of the day, this is Johnny Cash's story, and we're just telling it. And he was a man that was changed by his faith and changed by God.
I think for myself as well that the faith journey is part and parcel of who Johnny Cash was as a man, and you can't take one without leaving out the other. And I'm so very glad, Ben, that you really did that with your documentary here. And for everyone out there listening, December 5, select theaters across the US, Johnny Cash, Redemption of an American Icon. I really recommend people go to fathomevents.com. They'll be hosting screenings. You can go to their website. You can find locations, screening dates, tickets. And I really recommend people do check out this movie because, as we talked about, Ben, not only is it important that you got to tell Johnny's story, his faith-based story, but the movie just looks great, sounds great. Marty Stewart's narration is just perfect in it. The interviews are really well done as well. So congratulations to you. Best of luck with the film's release. Hopefully we get to talk again. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today.
Yeah, this was great, Matt. Thank you so much. And hopefully we can get the movie to Australia at some point. I'm glad you at least got to see it.
I'm glad I got to see it as well. Thank you, Ben.
All right. Hey, thank you. Bye.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content. Also, if you would like to request a review and support my work, please join my Patreon via the link in the description below.